colonialism, exclusion, and erasure by amplifying Indigenous voices, narratives, and works. This committee has long dedicated itself to uplifting the voices of marginalized communities. For centuries, Indigenous communities have faced profound harm, the loss of their land, culture, and traditions. Yet their vibrant communities continue in bettering our society. Indigenous arts and culture represent so much more than just creative self-expression. They serve as a powerful mechanism for preserving their heritage. We must present Indigenous voices to all New Yorkers so that we can gain a deeper understanding of their lived experience and struggles. Without proper support from the city, Indigenous arts, culture, and history can be further marginalized, creating still more challenges in gaining the recognition they so deeply deserve. I'm looking forward to discussing the ongoing efforts of both our libraries and arts and cultural organizations to support this community. Our 3 public library systems also play a crucial role in educating the public and creating space for Indigenous voices. And through lectures, poetry, discussions, arts workshops, book recommendations, and exhibitions, our libraries highlight Indigenous stories, offering both cultural enrichment and historical reflection. I'm eager to hear more about the role that DCLA plays in supporting organizations that are led by Indigenous peoples and that can bring their talents to all New Yorkers with this support. And while November is recognized as National Native American Heritage Month, I hope to hear more details on how the libraries and DCLA work to support Indigenous arts and culture all year round. Now I want to acknowledge my colleagues on the committee who are present, Jose, Hudson, Carr, and Ung. Okay, thank you for being here. I would like to thank the committee staff who put together this hearing, Christina Yelamati, the committee's counsel, Regina Paul, the committee's policy analyst, and Sandra Gray, the committee's finance analyst. And I'd like to thank my staff, Katie Loeb, my chief of staff, and Eddie Amador, my director of legislation. I would also like to remind everyone who wishes to testify in person today that you must fill out the white appearance card, the little slip of paper, which is located on the desk of the Sergeant-at-Arms near the entrance of this room. Even if you have already registered in advance, you will be testifying in person today. Please fill that out. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to limit any questions and comments they have to 5 minutes. And as a reminder to all our witnesses, please state your name prior to your testimony for the record. We're ready to start with the panel of representatives from DCLA. Thank you for being here. And please say your name for the record when you start your testimony. And I'll turn it over to Christina.
Hi, good morning. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this committee and to respond honestly to council member questions? Larry Cumbo?
I do.
Lance Pallavi?
I do.
Thank you. You may begin.
Good morning, and I want to begin by thanking everyone for your patience as I was arriving. Normally, I would blame it on the traffic in Staten Island, but Councilmember Carr is here, so that won't work as effectively today. Good morning, Chair Rivera and the members of the committee. I am Lori Cumbo, Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, here to testify in regards to today's topic, surrounding the arts, culture, and history of the Indigenous peoples in New York City. I want to thank the Council for having a hearing on this important topic. Really, I believe this is the first time this Council has had such an important hearing on such an incredible and important community. There has been tremendous momentum in recent years to better recognize and celebrate the Native people who lived on this land before Europeans arrived, and whose ancestors continue to live here and across the U.S. today. Native Americans are a dynamic community here in New York City. More than 180,000 city residents identified as having American Indian or Alaska Native ancestry in the most recent census. The efforts to be more inclusive of Native American voices and culture include both important symbolic and ceremonial gestures and real investments in Indigenous communities that are helping to amplify their voices and reclaim their place in our national narrative. There's so much more to be done, and that is why we are here today. But following Native American Heritage Month, this is a great moment to take stock of what the cultural community here in New York is doing to uplift the Indigenous people of this land, past, present, and future, and how we in city government can better support this work. So I'm grateful for you for convening today's hearing. Art and culture can do for our Indigenous communities what it does for so many others. It can help to foster, preserve, and share an identity. It can forge community networks, strengthen social bonds, and drive local economies. Art can also carve out a space in contemporary society, communicating across the divides that have kept Indigenous people unfairly marginalized for generations. This weekend, I had an amazing time at a Lenape Cultural Fair in Prospect Park, which brought together Indigenous artists from around the region. The traditional crafts, which is where I got these earrings, the traditional crafts, artwork, food, and performances at the fair were so joyful and alive. I was honored to participate in this vibrant celebration, and I'm thrilled that so many groups across our city are taking steps to listen to Indigenous people and collaborate with them on events like this one. And I have to say, the event was packed. It was incredible. They had arts, craft making. My son made a doll out of corn husks that is just phenomenal. It was a great celebration of the heritage and culture. It's only going to grow. I encourage everyone here to make sure that you check this out because it's going to be an annual event. As you know, the primary way that the Department of Cultural Affairs supports the cultural life of New York City is through funding to not-for-profits, which in turn create the vast array of programming that is so central to our city's energy and identity. Many of these groups offer programming that engages deeply with Indigenous culture, uplifts Indigenous artists, explores Indigenous history, and works closely with Indigenous people to convey the diversity and vibrancy of their culture to audiences. To share just a few examples of Indigenous programming, exhibitions, and events from organizations we're proud to support. At historic Richmond Town on Staten Island, their native encampment site features a wigwam and several other structures that depict the life of Native people in Staten Island during post-European contact. The encampment includes special programs throughout the year, including Old Home Day and Hearth and Harvest Weekend, another phenomenal event that I've been able to attend. For Native American Heritage Month, the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx offered programming and digital highlights of the plant-based traditions of Native Americans from the Northeast and throughout the Americas. These included lessons on the Lenape's use of plants for food, medicine, tools, building materials, alongside Native-led programs exploring contemporary Indigenous perspectives. The Met Museum offers a great example of how cultural organizations can both examine Native history and tradition and uplift contemporary Indigenous artists. For Native American Heritage Month, they offered a tour exploring subjects, voices, and narratives found across 5,000 plus years of artwork in their collection. From 2019 to 2021, the Met also featured a site-specific commission in their Great Hall by Kent Mockman, a Cree artist known for his playful and provocative reimaginings of Western European and American art history. This past Saturday, Flushing Town Hall in Queens hosted a Native American market and social featuring artwork, dancing, drumming, singing, and storytelling in an event created in collaboration with Indigenous-led organizations, artists, and small businesses. Many of you may be familiar with the American Museum of Natural History reopening their Northwest Coast Hall in 2022 following a 5-year, $19 million renovation. This was done in close consultation with First Nations people of Canada's Vancouver Island, where many of the artifacts originated. The new hall thoughtfully incorporates the perspectives of the 10 nations whose cultures are displayed, giving greater care and context to the meaning of the items for the people who created them. Space is also provided for first-person community testimony and for examining the government-backed oppression of their people. The process of presenting these sacred objects in a way that is respectful and gives their creators their due is part of an ongoing conversation that's happening in institutions around the world. It is truly a must-see. Last year, the Whitney Museum of American Art held an exhibition of the work of Indigenous artist John Quick to C. Smith, the first New York retrospective of her extraordinary work. The museum hosted several open studios for families with kids of all ages and collaborated with Rachel Martin, an Indigenous artist based in Brooklyn, to lead a family program inspired by the groundbreaking exhibition. On Governor's Island, American Indian Community House has been an organization in residence since 2019, receiving free indoor space on the island in exchange for offering free public programming. In September of this year, the public programming that grew from this partnership included a panel featuring a retrospective of Thunderbird American Indian dancers, which explored the links between land-based dances and well-being. The La Mama Indigenous Initiative aims to provide a platform for Indigenous art and culture, both nationally and worldwide. The initiative curates original Indigenous programming, including workshops, markets, and theatrical productions to elevate the voices and artistic works of Native communities. This year marked Lotus Music and Dance's 22nd annual Drums Along the Hudson, a Native American and multicultural celebration which happened this past June in Inwood Hill Park. I've been every year. It's phenomenal. That's where I got this wrap. Wonderful shopping, incredible culture. The drumming is so spiritually inspiring. It's an incredible event. I encourage everyone to attend. The event was conceived as a powwow in 2002 and has evolved into a showcase of cultures that share the drum as the heartbeat of artistic expression. We're proud to partner with Council to invest in our city's organizations doing this important work through the Cultural Development Fund, Coalition of Theaters of Color, and other Council initiatives we administer. DCLA has worked with Council to support a number of organizations with missions dedicated to Native American culture and programming. These include Amarinda, which promotes the Indigenous perspective in the arts to a broad audience through the creation of new work in contemporary art forms, visual, performing, literary, and media. Amarinda is committed to empowering Native Americans, breaking down barriers, and fostering intercultural understanding and appreciation for Native American culture. Kupdanza is an interdisciplinary art, media, and educational organization that produces dance and multimedia experiences inspired by the wisdom of Indigenous American cultures. They engage in local and international collaborations to create artivism, performances, community, and educational programs to generate environmental awareness. The Red Hawk Indian Arts Council is a not-for-profit organization founded and maintained by Native American artists and educators residing in New York and New Jersey. Since 1994, the council has been dedicated to educating the general public about Native American heritage through song, dance, theater, works of art, and other cultural forms of expression. Each June, the council hosts the largest powwow in the Northeast at Brooklyn's Floyd Bennett Field. And of course, the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian has an outpost here in New York, located adjacent to Bowling Green and Battery Park. The institution cares for one of the world's most expansive collections of Native artifacts, encompassing the entire Western Hemisphere, and the location here in New York houses exhibitions, research, educational activities, and performing arts program. And of course, we all know Spider Woman Theater, founded and led by the extraordinary Muriel Miguel, has been a leading voice in advancing Native American voices through the performing arts since it was founded in 1976. In partnership with local arts council partners in each borough, DCLA invests nearly $3 million each year directly into artists, collectives, and smaller organizations across the 5 boroughs. The Bronx Council on the Arts recently awarded a Bronx Recognizes Its Own, or BRIO, award to Dennis Darkeem, whose work focuses on Indigenous visual art. The Brooklyn Arts Council includes Cliff Matias, founder of Red Hawk Native American Arts Council, in their Folk Feet Dance Workshop Guide, which aims to connect people to Brooklyn's traditional dance masters. We will continue to work with the arts councils to support Indigenous culture and creative expression across the 5 boroughs. Through our Percent for Art program, we've commissioned a number of Native American artists for permanent, site-specific public artworks. These include artist Jeffrey Gibson, who designed a mural for a community room in the New York home of NYPD's 40th Precinct in the Bronx, and Frank Big Bear, who created a set of works on paper for the library of PS 75 in Brooklyn. Next year marks 400 years since the Dutch established a permanent colony on Lenape land not far from here. At this moment in our history, we are poised to make the most of this milestone, to dig deeper in the Native history of our city, and to explore new narratives, more accurate narratives, around the people and communities who made New York City into the city it is today. willingly or not. Last month, Mayor Adams hosted a reception at Gracie Mansion for Indigenous groups and declared November 20th Lenape Heritage Day. Next year, NYC Tourism will be leading a collective effort to mark the occasion through a range of programming. For our part, we will be making sure to connect our cultural partners with the citywide programming that will accompany the 400th anniversary. We're living through an incredible moment where Indigenous people are raising their voices, working together, and fighting for recognition across New York City and beyond. This gives me so much hope for the future. We're seeing new opportunities open up for Native American artists and cultural organizations, and so many other organizations are taking the initiative to work with Native people to right the wrongs that are ingrained in their collections, exhibitions, and programs. We recognize that there is still a tremendous way to go. And here in New York City, we are committed to taking that journey with our partners in the cultural sector. The phenomenal work and programming I've listed here today is just the start. I'm so inspired by the growing eagerness to listen to Indigenous voices, work with Indigenous leaders and communities in good faith, and work together toward a fairer, more inclusive approach to engaging with and celebrating their cultures. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on today's topic. I want to thank Ryan Max, who's here on my team, for doing so much of the research to produce this testimony today. It gives us a very well-rounded understanding of the progress that has been made, but also recognizing that there's so much more work to do. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I thank this committee for suggesting and putting together this very important hearing on a topic at this particular time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Cumbo. And I want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Lewis. So thank you for your testimony. I'm reminded of a conversation we had some time ago where you mentioned that the city of New York has been very intentional in saying now is the time to support Black, Indigenous, people of color. We're bringing them to the table, and in doing so, it's really important that we support them. It's clear. The funding has to be equitable, it has to be prioritized. And so I'm gonna ask just a couple questions on what DCLA is doing, particularly to support these artists, this population. Do you have any plans to extend funding to more Indigenous arts and cultural organizations? I know Coop Danza receives $15,000. Red Hawk Indian Arts Council receives $19,000. That was in fiscal year '24. However, no other Indigenous-led organizations have received funding in this cycle. How can we work together to ensure that that list is much longer in the next fiscal year?
Thank you so much for that question. We, as an agency, we fund approximately about 80% of the organizations that apply to our agency. So it's very important for our Indigenous community. We need more organizations coming forward in order to fund more organizations. At this time, the Department of Cultural Affairs, our largest grant award amount is $100,000. That is our ceiling at this time. And so for awards, they are based off of the budget, the annual operating budget of each organization. So we have to award grants in proportion to the actual annual budget size. So for those organizations, we are able to do that through a panel review process. Two things that could happen here: if we had more individuals from the Native American community participating in the panel review process, if we had more Native American organizations participating and submitting grants and applications, which our agency is more than willing to help and support in that application process, then we could increase the amount of funding that go to our Indigenous communities. And that's certainly something that we all want to see moving forward. I also want to say that with the number of organizations that we do support, it doesn't reflect the amount of organizations that do provide exhibition space, artist in residency programs, teaching artist programs. And also for the agency, We can award funding through the panel review process, but we can also increase that funding in partnership with the City Council, where you have more flexibility for discretionary grants that would allow us to collaborate on awarding larger grants for these really important organizations.
So given the importance of supporting Indigenous art, does DCLA give Indigenous arts and cultural organizations any kind of priority in funding? And you've mentioned some of the barriers, right? We need more participation, we need more groups applying, but how does DCLA prioritize the groups that have come forward, have approached the city for support, and how can the City Council better support Indigenous arts and cultural organizations?
Excellent question. We are not permitted to give priority to any one particular organization. All of the organizations that come before the Department of Cultural Affairs, they are going through a panel review process of their peers, and it would not be permissible for us to give any one organization special preference or consideration in that way. For the City Council, you have more flexibility in that perhaps of wondering how we could create more funding for Native American communities. Perhaps the council could create an Indigenous cultural art fund, similar to other funds that have been created, such as the Theaters of Color or the Holocaust Initiative, or there are many different initiatives that have been created. So I feel like if the Native community wanted to work with the City Council to create an Indigenous fund, that would be a way in which funding could be allocated to that community.
Certainly, I mean, we would love to expand our initiatives. We, especially when it comes to arts and culture, clearly you've been a champion for that. So have the members of this committee. I'm very thankful to them. We've also looked at even, arts in workforce and how we can amplify and support and expand some of the funding in that sector, because these are important jobs, and artists are also struggling to live here. This is an incredibly expensive city. So given the city's affordability crisis, what is DCLA doing to ensure that Indigenous artists can continue to live and work in New York City? What should you be doing, and what can we do in collaboration?
We can always do more with more, and that is really our mantra here at the Department of Cultural Affairs. The way that we are actually able to fund Indigenous artists are through our local art councils. So the ability to fund artists would happen specifically through the Brooklyn Arts Councils, LMCC, the Queens Council on the Arts, the Staten Island Council on the Arts, and the Bronx Council on the Arts. These are the larger of those, but there are also ones like NOMA, where people are able to fund and provide grants for artists. And our agency is really excited about the opportunity to fund artists through those initiatives. So as read in testimony, there are many artists and arts organizations that are applying to our local arts councils for that type of funding. We are also doing a lot with our Percent for Art program. We're really excited about the opportunity for many of our Indigenous communities to participate in the Percent for Art program, where they're able to have permanent works of art that are part of the fabric, the cultural permanent fabric of New York City. And we're really excited about the work that's happening on Governor's Island for our Native American communities, where they are able to have very often free space or space at no cost for them to express all of their cultural expressions here in New York City. So there are many opportunities in that way, but of course the issues that the Native American community are facing in terms of the cost of living in New York City are issues that we are working on for the entire cultural community to find more ways for artists to be able to sustain themselves in New York City. And that's ongoing work that will be forever something that in a city as expensive as New York City that we're going to be grappling with.
I agree. I mean, I always start with housing, I know this is the Culture Committee, but we need to do something about it because people deserve to have a good place to live.
I look forward to a Housing and Cultural Committee joint hearing on that very topic.
We've got, the Actors Fund, I know they have a new name now. They're working on housing in Hell's Kitchen. I think there's a lot of potential to do similar models in many of our districts. So I want to thank you because your testimony actually, covered many organizations that are doing good work, and we're going to hear from some incredible people. That's what I'm most looking forward to. So you don't have much time up here. So please, any last thoughts? I did want to ask, because you mentioned all of these great groups, from very large organizations to, my own Fourth Arts Block, La Mama initiative here. The educational component of these organizations are so important as well. And do you believe that New Yorkers are sufficiently aware of the importance of Indigenous arts and culture?
I would say that in New York City specifically, we've done a lot to raise up the history and the culture of many of the voices in New York City and cultural creators that have made New York City what it is today. I think that we have a long way to go, but I do see momentum and movement forward because, frankly, many of the people in this room have raised their voices on so many different levels, inserting their culture in New York City in a way that is to the benefit of the city. Until you really understand Native American, Indigenous culture and the truth and the reality, however uncomfortable that is in a school and educational setting, until you understand Native American contribution, the forced removal, the reality of that forced removal, anything else that you understand about New York City will only confuse you. So it's really important that on an educational level, on a cultural level, that we continue this momentum of rewriting the history of New York City. And I'm hoping that on so many levels that this recognition of the 400 years following the Dutch forced removal of Native people from their land, I'm hoping that this recognition will rewrite that history, but in rewriting that history, that we will also come forward with new policies, new implementation, new curriculum, the levels of equality that are so needed and necessary, but also on many levels we have to make sure that our land acknowledgements become a reality of not only acknowledgement, but actual usage, of actual being able to reclaim, of actual real space that communities can utilize.
I certainly agree with you. I think that legacy of colonialism and exclusion and erasure is just something that we have to continue to discuss. And I think when people say, well, what can you do for any particular community across the city that has been historically disenfranchised, marginalized, the answer is support. And it's to show support with actual funding, with showing up, with including representation. And it has to be led by these very individuals and this incredibly talented group of New Yorkers. I just want to make sure that we acknowledge Councilmember Hanif. Thank you for joining us. Do my colleagues have any questions? I think many of us want to hear from the artists. You did a great job in really encompassing a lot of the work that's happening across the city. And thank you. I'll always say we need the mayor's office to continue to not just keep funding, but increase baselines and support as many groups as possible. So thank you for your partnership, thank you for your testimony, and I encourage you to stay and listen to your colleagues.
Thank you. I will remain for the remainder of the hearing and look forward to also hearing from many of my colleagues that are here today to testify. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, we're ready to start with the panel of representatives from the libraries and the Lenape Center. Please join us. These are them, right? Yes. Okay, Jason Bauman, Sharon Myrie, Joe Whitney, and Joe Baker. Okay. Well, what a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. And you can start as soon as you're ready.
Good morning. My name is Joe Baker. I'm an enrolled member of the Delaware Tribe of Indians, whose headquarters are located in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. I'm a proud member of the Simon White Turkey family who arrived in Indian Territory, the present-day state of Oklahoma, in 1867. I would ask everyone to point their eyes to the painting of George Washington, which is hanging here in the chamber wall. My fourth great-grandfather, Captain White Eyes, negotiated the first treaty with the U.S. government, United States government, with General Washington. And that treaty was to create the 14th all-Lenape state with representation in Congress. I share that with you because it really begins to tell the complex story of the important presence of Lenape and the contributions that the Lenape people have made to this city and the state of New York. I appreciate Commissioner Cumbo's outline of activities, a plethora of activities around Native American communities, but I have to say I'm disappointed that the Lenape Center was not mentioned. I am co-founder and executive director of Lenape Center here in Manhattan, which was established in 2009 to continue our cultural presence in a city that has all but erased us. And that work has not been easy. It's difficult work. And we've realized our expressions, our educational platforms through partnerships with other cultural organizations within the city. I also want to share, since I'm in City Hall, a story from my community, a story that happened 40 years ago when tribal elder Nora Thompson Dean drove her little Ford Falcon station wagon from Oklahoma here to New York City. The reason for the trip was she was presenting a paper at Seton Hall University, but a legend grew up around her trip into the city to meet with the then mayor, Ed Koch. So she was in this very building, waiting to meet with the mayor. This would have been a historic moment. The meeting never happened. After waiting in the chamber, his assistant presented her with a souvenir pin of the city of New York. And I share that story with you because I think about how different our present day experience of New York City could have been had that meeting happened. And I'm happy to share with you another historic moment that happened only a few weeks ago, November 1st, 2024, when Mayor Adams received at Gracie Mansion my Chief Brad Kilscrow, in a meeting. So I think it's taken 40 years for us to move forward. But there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And when I think about how the city unfolds and expresses itself, I'm always reminded that this big umbrella, this big tent, umbrella that we people of color, Native people, Native communities are placed under is confusing, is perhaps not the best forward approach, because we're not alike. We all are unique. We have a unique language, we have unique culture, we have unique experiences. And one must first recognize the original people of this place, the indigenous people of this place, the Lenape. before any other recognition can happen. And that recognition must really begin and start with the understanding that there are 3 federally recognized Lenape nations living within the borders of the United States. These are governments, sovereign nations. They are the true survivors of what was a genocide the world has never come to reckon with. So consultation for any of these programs for art and culture must first begin with the true and authentic representatives of those tribal nations. That is something General Washington knew. That's part of the history of New York. And that treaty, though not realized, in our opinion, in our view, and in our communities, is still active. And we come before the City of New York, we come before your committee, and we ask that you respect our sovereignty, that you respect our art and culture, and that you celebrate with us the unique story that is New York City. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joel Whitney, and I'm the BPL Presents Literary Curator at Brooklyn Public Library. Thank you to Chair Rivera and the members of this committee, as well as the entire City Council, for the opportunity this morning to highlight our partnership with the Lenape Center and work across many BPL departments to celebrate and support the arts and culture of Indigenous people in New York City. BPL Presents, overseen by Vice President of Arts and Culture Laszlo Jakob Orsos, is the library's year-round series of arts and culture events, including author talks, panel discussions and readings, as well as live music, dance and theater, film screenings, and art exhibitions. Events feature new and established artists engaged in exploring non-traditional artistic spaces and incorporating civic themes. So far in 2024, we've presented over 790 cultural events attended by more than 51,000 patrons, including an event just last month with the Lenape Center. The Lenape are, of course, the original inhabitants of the land we are meeting on today. 4 years ago, my colleagues and I met with Joe Baker, Adrian Kumans, Brent Michael Davis, and Curtis Zuniga of the Lenape Center and asked a simple question: what do you need? Their answer launched an ongoing multi-year and multidisciplinary collaboration that has touched on so many facets of BPL. Within 2 years of that conversation, we opened Lenape Hawking, the first Lenape-curated exhibition of Lenape cultural arts in the city of New York. Lenape Hawking is the Lenape name for their homeland, reaching from northern Delaware to the foot of the Catskills, from western Connecticut to eastern Pennsylvania, with New York City at its center. Curated by Joe Baker, Lenape Hawking used a mix of contemporary and historical objects to tell the story of a vast and vibrant community, reframing the narrative of Indigenous tribes told in more traditional settings, which too often overlooks the genocide of the Lenape people and their living legacy today. With Mr. Baker and his colleagues, we selected Greenpoint Library and Environmental and Education Center as the home for Lenape Hawking. This library archives Greenpoint's history as the site of one of the largest oil spills ever recorded in the United States and the community's fight for environmental justice. During the exhibition, the branch's rooftop teaching garden featured indigenous fruit trees that were historically cultivated by the Lenape in Manhattan and elsewhere, using seeds descended from those carried by Lenape people during the forced expulsions from the East Coast. The incorporation of organic materials into the exhibition space created a portal into the living culture of the Lenape people today and a continuity between the ecological past and present. Alongside this exhibit, BPL hosted poetry readings, artist talks, and panel discussions as part of an ongoing reckoning around Indigenous rights and historical revisionism of the Lenape. This series featured talks with activist Gloria Steinem on critical social issues, readings by Lenape poet Rebecca Half-Lowry, and panel discussions with the nonprofit Hudson Valley Farm Hub, all of which prescind, recognize, and honor the fervent, Lenape plan of return to their homeland. They should be welcomed by New York City's institutions, lest we continue to perpetuate the erasure and injustice of centuries of forced removal. As part of the exhibition, Lenape Center and BPL began discussing a curated book list patrons could reference to further learn about Lenape history. This was not possible, however. There were just not enough published books detailing Lenape culture in their own words and images in a way that did not relegate their stories to the distant past. To correct this, BPL and Lenape Center published Lenape Hawking, an anthology with selections of original Indigenous scholarship, essays, poetry, full-color art, and more. Approaching its fourth printing, this anthology is available in select libraries across the region. Last month, in a conversation at Central Library's S. Stefan Dweck Cultural Center, Mr. Baker mentioned that our actions like this can be generative and impactful in ways we might never know. He was describing to over 100 educators how this anthology is the foundation of Lenape Center's partnership with Teachers College professor Rachel Talbert to create curriculum for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade students to provide a comprehensive approach to teaching Lenape history and culture. He could easily have been describing that first conversation BPL and Lenape Center had together. But beyond these actions, BPL took a participatory approach to the acquisition of Indigenous stories and materials in our collection. BPL staff worked alongside Lenape Center to find books that should be in BPL's collection. Internally, BPL has also launched an Indigenous Services Committee to advise on strategies to help connect our patrons with the diversity of materials on our shelves through innovative programming, marketing, and outreach. This committee was launched in 2019 after the Living Land Acknowledgement convening hosted by the Brooklyn Museum right next door. Separately from our work with Lenape Center, BPL's Heritage Ambassador Program aims to foster and highlight folk arts at our branch libraries. This initiative supports folk and traditional artists in Brooklyn by connecting library patrons to cultural heritage practices through art making, storytelling, and community knowledge sharing. For much of this year, works by Heritage Ambassador Bebonkwe Brown, a Brooklyn-based Plains Cree artist, hung at Brooklyn Heights Library, and an exhibit titled Urban Skins and Ancient Kin, and Heritage Ambassador Araceli Poma created mini documentaries with Indigenous language speakers here in New York City. BPL's Center for Brooklyn History archives the work by Heritage Ambassadors. I and the BPL team are really proud of this work. We consider everything I've described to you to be part of our Living Land Acknowledgement. This is not just something we say at the start of special programs or at ribbon cuttings, but a collaboration and a practice we've put into place. It's not just words, but actions we are taking to support the culture of Lenape and Indigenous peoples in New York City. And I thank you again for the time to speak this morning and for all your support for libraries.
Good morning. My name is Sharon Myrie, and I'm the Vice President of Programs and Services at Queens Public Library. It's a pleasure to be here to speak on how the library serves as a key resource in discovery and learning about the history, culture, and arts of Indigenous peoples in New York City. Before I begin, Chair Rivera and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on this subject and for the incredible work that you do to support our libraries. Queens Public Library welcomes every individual who visits our branches and our digital platforms, regardless of their circumstances or background. Our branches serve as beacons of knowledge and opportunity, allowing our users to follow their curiosity, dive into any subject matter, and form their own viewpoints. A significant component of fulfilling this mission is preserving and strengthening our extensive collections to aid in anyone's learning journey. We take seriously this responsibility, including as it relates to our offerings focused on the Indigenous peoples of New York City. The library has a vast and diverse collection comprised of books, ebooks, periodicals, newspapers, and more. Our collections include materials that focus on Indigenous people, their history and contributions, fiction, social justice, health and wellness, and poetry, and more for all ages. Free streaming platforms offered by QPL like Hoopla and Freegal offer audiobooks, television shows, documentaries, and music created by and/or focused on Native Americans. While these items are available throughout the year, a special spotlight is given during Indigenous Peoples Day and Native American Heritage Month, along with special programs and curated book lists and displays for adults, teens, and children. This year, the library's programs included a Native American-focused QPL Baby and Me Storytime at Auburndale Library, a celebration of Native American heritage with Alexia Dreams Storytelling at Rochdale Village Library, which was sponsored by speaker Adrian Adams, and a book discussion on Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange at our Fresh Meadow Library. Vital to QPL's ability to properly provide and promote information on this topic is close collaboration with various cultural institutions, community-based organizations, and local groups. In partnership with CUNY Queens College, QPL's Queens Memory Project collects personal histories, photographs, and other records of contemporary life in the borough. Since 2016, Queens Memory has been collaborating with Professor Jonathan Thayer and graduate students on the ongoing project, the Old Town of Flushing Burial Ground. Starting initially as grassroots community activism, the project aims to document and preserve the original Native and African American burial ground that dates back to the 18th and 19th centuries, which was turned into a city park in the 1930s. Including local residents, several of whom are descendants of those buried at the location, this collaborative effort continues to reveal more about the history of the grounds through research and interviews, and shares its study through public presentations, lesson plans, oral history interviews, and genealogical research on the Queens Memory website. In 2019, the burial ground in this research project served as an inspiration for a Queens Museum exhibit by Alexandria Smith called Monuments to an Effigy. More recently, Queens Memory has been working with Zion Episcopal Church in Douglaston to examine the church's history, in particular, its relationship with the local Manitowoc Nation. With support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, Queens Memory is working with the church to examine and reveal its past relationships with the tribe, especially the relocation in 1931 of their burial grounds to the churchyard. In February, we hosted a 4-week community conversation series with Zion at our Douglaston Little Neck Library, and we're currently coordinating a follow-up series for next year. We look forward to sharing our research about the Manitowoc and their experience in relationship with Zion Episcopal Church as our research continues. QPL's archives are essential to the ongoing documentation of life in Queens and Long Island, with thousands of photographs, newspapers, books, audio recordings, including interviews conducted by Queens Memory and more. One highlight is an interview with Chief Little Fox, the Sachem chief of Manitowoc Nation, in which he discusses growing up with Native American traditions, becoming the leader of the tribe, and the preservation of the tribe's traditions and land. Archival content illustrating the lives and memories of the local tribes also includes a collection of photos, postcards, and papers. Readily available online are the East Hampton Inhabitants and its Indian Tribes papers, a collection of 11 manuscripts on land transactions from the 17th century, as well as the Ralph Selecki photographs, which showcase artifacts like arrowheads, ceramics, and other supplies that provide a glimpse into the past lives of Indigenous peoples. Additionally, the library's research databases are valuable for discovery and learning about Indigenous groups. Users looking to learn more about the Lenape and Native populations can access Britannica Academic, which provides information not just on the peoples of New York, but also the East Coast and entire continent. The database suggests other potential areas of interest for those who want to learn more about the Lenape and critical moments in their history, such as the walking purchase, the infamous treaty that forced them off their own lands. It also recommends primary documents, for example, the treaty with Delaware's 1778, and external sites such as the official site of the Delaware Tribe of Indians and a national public radio segment on the Lenape. For individuals interested in learning more about their own family histories, QPL has Ancestry Plus. This database provides access and makes it easier for users to search government records to learn more about their ancestors, including records on Black and Indigenous soldiers who served in the American Revolution, Indian census rolls dating from 1885 to 1940, and letters received by the Office of Indian Affairs from 1824 to 1881. It also provides the ability to engage others via message boards for helpful recommendations from others doing similar work. The library is proud to uphold its legacy of serving as a free and trusted repository of information. While we're proud of the resources we offer that focus on the city's Indigenous people, we know that there is more we can do. Queens Public Library is dedicated to ensuring all the cultures, races, and ethnicities that form this amazing borough and city are recognized in our collections and our programs, including the Indigenous peoples who originally lived on this land. We look forward to continuing to expand this area in our public offerings, giving more opportunities for the public to learn about the people who stood here before us. Thank you, Chair Rivera, for the opportunity to testify on behalf of Queens Public Library.
Good morning. My name is Jason Bauman, and I am the Susan and Douglas Dillon Director for Collection Development and Global Studies at the New York Public Library. I would like to thank Chair Rivera, Speaker Adams, and the members of this committee for inviting me to testify today. It is a privilege to share the work NYPL does to support the arts, culture, and history of Indigenous people in New York City. Today, I will be talking about this topic with respect to our research collections, special events and exhibits, and initiatives within our branch libraries. You will observe that NYPL's support of the arts, culture, and history of Indigenous people speaks to collections and initiatives both by and about this demographic. Our primary offerings that pertain to the history of Indigenous peoples are our research collections. While the city primarily funds the operations and collections of NYPL's branch libraries, our endowment and other private funding support the majority of the offerings of our 4 research libraries. NYPL's research collections have more than 100,000 volumes that document Indigenous peoples of the Americas. This ranges from the earliest grammars and dictionaries of Indigenous languages from the 16th century to contemporary literature, including children's and young adult literature, and scholarship by Indigenous people. The library's curators collect not only materials by and about the Indigenous people of the United States, but also North, Central, South America, and the Caribbean, with very strong holdings in Spanish, Portuguese, French, and dozens of Indigenous languages. The library's collections are also strong in historical works and linguistics, with many pioneering works on native languages, including manuscript dictionaries of Algonquin and Chippewa languages from the 19th century. Library's special collections are strong in documentation of Indigenous relations during the 16th and 17th century colonial period for Latin America, particularly in Mexico and Peru, including early manuscripts in Nahuatl. Additionally, NYPL holds important documents relating to New York's relations with the Six Nations, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, Tuscarora in the 18th century. Building on these published works and historical collections, our curators have grown our visual collections by Indigenous artists in recent years, acquiring works by interdisciplinary Diné artist Dakota Mace, photographs by Indigenous Inuit Canadian artists for our recent exhibition about the Arctic, as well as acquiring a collection of the first photographs of Indigenous communities in Colombia, important collections of photo documentation of Indigenous communities in Brazil, and artist books from Indigenous creators in Colombia, Mexico, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Peru, among others. Beyond acquisitions and offerings, the library's curator for Latin American, Iberian, and U.S. Latino studies works intensively on showcasing relevant holdings and connecting them to Latin American Indigenous communities in New York City. In 2019, this team organized and hosted the panel Identity, Culture, and Poetics in Latin America, Reading and Conversation with Elikura Chihualef, Jose Marmol, and Miguel Angel Zapata. Mr. Chihualef is considered one of the most influential Mapuche Chilean authors. He writes in Mapudungun and in Spanish and has been translated into many other languages. In April 2024, the same department connected with the Colibri Collective, an organization in New York City of Indigenous translators working with the Department of Education and Health to provide translation and interpretation services of Latin American Indigenous languages. Our curator gave the collective an orientation on the diversity of books and periodicals that the library holds in dozens of Indigenous languages that can aid them in their work. The team also published a research guide in Spanish to facilitate the discovery of these materials and has provided similar orientations for students in the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at NYU. This year, our Latin American, Iberian, and U.S. Latino Studies curator additionally took steps took the first steps to establish a collaborative relationship with the Juan de Cordova Research Library, a renowned cultural institution in Oaxaca that specializes in indigenous languages from the Americas. Our organizations coordinated to digitize La Rosa del Amor, an extremely rare 19th century pamphlet in Zapotec language, whose only surviving copy is held at NYPL's Stephen A. Schwartzman building. This pamphlet will eventually be published in a facsimile edition by the state of Oaxaca to promote the reading of texts in Zapotec. Complementing our research collections and activities, there are a number of exhibitions and programs. NYPL's premier cultural series, Live from NYPL, which hosts writers, artists, and scholars for conversations and performances, has held events that highlight Indigenous authors and topics on several occasions. In 2023, the series hosted Lenape Center co-founders and co-directors Joe Baker, Curtis Zuniga, and Hadrian Kumans, along with Kara Fisher, curator of visual arts programming at Brooklyn Public Library, for a conversation entitled The Land We're On, Living Lenape Hoking. The four speakers discussed the Lenape Center's work, a Lenape Hoking anthology, a work that contends with subjects ranging from the myth of the purchase of Manhattan to the self-curation of Indigenous art and culture. In June of last year, the Library for the Performing Arts hosted an exhibition entitled Border Crossings, Exile in American Modern Dance, 1900 to 1950. Border Crossings highlighted the fundamental contributions of artists of color, immigrant, and indigenous communities to the history of modern dance. It featured photography, costumes, moving images, and archival objects in an examination of the crucial issues of geopolitical events and structural racism at the heart of American modern dance. Additionally, a number of works by artists and makers indigenous to North America have been displayed in Treasures, our permanent exhibition highlighting our world-renowned research collections since it opened in 2021. This includes a print by contemporary Diné artist Dakota Mace to a syllabary by Sequoia, a member of the Cherokee Nation, recording his language, among others. In the spring of 2026, NYPL plans to mark the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence with an exhibition entitled Revolution at 2050. The exhibition will feature all aspects of the dynamics leading up to and following this historic event. This includes the exclusion of women, enslaved people, and indigenous people from those identified as American. The center case will also feature documents highlighting the role of Western expansion and Indian removal in precipitating the revolution. NYPL's branch libraries conduct a number of initiatives, campaigns, and offerings that aim to support arts, culture, and history of Indigenous people in New York City. On an ongoing basis, branches highlight Indigenous voices through selections for branch book discussions. For example, this past month, branches hosted discussions about relevant titles like Shutter, Future of the Living Good, and Wandering Stars. The branches also regularly hold heritage celebrations, a cornerstone of programming, with events that celebrate the multicultural diversity and rich heritage of our communities. One such celebration took place as a collaboration between the Staten Island Museum and the West New Brighton Library. The branch hosted the event, where participants learned about the history of the Lenape people on Staten Island and joined an art activity where they made a pinch pot inspired by artworks on display. A number of programs geared towards children and young adults focus on works by and about Indigenous peoples as well. This includes Kids Live events featuring relevant titles from our Best Books for Kids lists and a two-page spread on the Lenape in our Teen Reading Ambassador-produced magazine, Portal. Our teen reading ambassadors have also written a number of blog posts in observance of Native American Heritage Month on book recommendations for kids. Since 2021, NYPL has hosted an annual World Literature Festival. The first festival featured a virtual panel discussion organized by our curator for Latin American, Iberian, and U.S. Latino Studies entitled Celebrating Indigenous Languages of the Americas. The event brought together Quechua Collective and the Mixteca organization, two New York City-based organizations who talked about the work in preserving and educating people about Indigenous languages of the Americas spoken in New York City. This year's World Literature Festival hosted Stephen Graham Jones for an author talk in his novel, My Heart is a Chainsaw. The book covers themes such as the Indigenous displacement and colonialism, among others, through the eyes of a half-Indian protagonist. Whether in our research materials, on display in our exhibitions, or through an interactive event with our patrons, the New York Public Library is committed to telling the stories and featuring the works of Indigenous people. I thank you for the opportunity to testify today and am available for any questions.
Thank you so much to all of you for your testimony and for being as inclusive as possible. I realize, there are so many struggles within our own Indigenous communities. Arts and culture should never take a back seat. But as we deal with economic instability and political turmoil and our perpetual fight for adequate representation, it can be exhausting. So it's important to, I think, also highlight the celebrations. And I appreciate that that is also included in addition to the recognition of the brutality, the survival of brutality and genocide. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Baker, if that's okay. I just want to thank you for what you said about how sometimes the tent can get very big. And sometimes we have this, this inclination to bring everyone in, and then what happens is the faces get lost in the crowd, and we sort of lose the moral of the story, the plot, if you will, over what we were doing in the first place, which is to intentionally recognize unique language, culture, and experiences of people. And recognizing the original people, I thought, was the most important. So you are embarking on this multi-year, multidisciplinary collaboration along with your colleagues. What is the vision for, the next year, the next couple years, and specifically, how can the city be helpful?
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and your questions. And looking ahead, for Lenape Center, we are looking to identify a permanent physical space within the city of New York. We feel that we have an important place and role to play in the future of this city. 650 million visitors per year. They come to the city. We at Lenape Center field questions all the time from international visitors asking, where do we go to learn about the original people of this place? We can't direct them anywhere because there is no one place, one center for art and culture for the Lenape people. And let me say that as a Lenape man, I have much more to offer than a powwow or a crafts fair. There is so much more to say and to learn and to share about our history. It's much more expensive than what we are often reduced to and categorized as Lenape people.
And what can we do to, I think, dispel the myths that was mentioned in testimony? How can we support authentic curation?
Authentic curation must begin first with proper consultation by the federally recognized tribal nations which exist within the borders of the U.S., the United States of America. Those are the authentic voices of Lenape culture. There are many people who have stepped into this place who speak for us. And sometimes, sadly, those voices are not recognized by our communities. So authentic voice must begin first with a proper consultation with the federally recognized tribes that live in the diaspora. They don't live here. That's part of the complexity and problem of it. But we are here, and Lenape Center can facilitate those discussions, as we did recently with the meeting with Mayor Adams and Chief Brad Kilscrew.
And I was very happy that you mentioned that, because you mentioned the meeting that never happened with Koch, and then 40 years later, I know you've been around since 2009, the center, though we have to find you a physical, permanent space. I'm glad that you mentioned that. You have to get it on the record because we're going to need all of the power of the agencies and the mayor's office. You've done quite a bit of consultation in your own capacity, and I know you're looking to grow the center. Are there certain partnerships or agencies that we can tap into to help grow your capacity, to help cultivate the things that you want to work on in New York City? I want to figure out how to be very intentional and helpful to the Lenape Center. And of course, I know the library is doing a tremendous job, but you also have colleagues here and individuals who want to support.
One example that I will point to that has been exceptional is a partnership with the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt Museum of Design. The 7th Design Invitational included an installation by Lenape Center, a welcome to territory. And so if we can continue to develop partnerships with our cultural institutions, with our museums, that bring authentic voice to these exhibitions and welcome to territory, that's really, really important. It's paramount.
Well, I know there are certainly cultural institutions and groups that are here that are also going to testify as to the work that they're doing. And we have our partners in the libraries. Clearly, there's Joe Baker here in the Lenape Center. But what is the process for your systems, for the library systems, in selecting Indigenous pieces for your exhibitions? And anyone can chime in.
I can't speak to that in particular point. I do want to reemphasize that what's been important to us at Queens Public Library is the relationships that we've had with several of those examples that I gave, and connecting it to Queens Memory, which has been an incredible tool for the Queens Public Library to really get to those authentic voices and to record that and to store that and to connect with the colleges, universities, in particular CUNY. And so that's been our particular focus in really working through the Queens Memory Project.
And I know you all have also honored Native American figures who've made significant cultural contributions in a variety of fields. I know the Queens Public Library has done that. Do you continue that tradition, and how do you ensure, and this is for all of the systems, how do you ensure that the public is aware of the programming, particularly around, Indigenous artists and talent?
Similar to many of the other programs that we've done, we, really focus through our marketing division and working that through that. I would say over the last several years, we've really been much more focused on trying to collectively focus on areas and making sure that we can provide that across the system. So we actually call that system-wide initiatives that we've done around particular events. And certainly this is one that we want to really focus on going forward. And that's a good way because we do it in a very intensive way across the system so that all 65 of our libraries are aware of, and the customers in 65 libraries are aware of that. So we have upcoming things right now in terms of our Time for Kind, and we have Black History Month, and I think the emphasis of really pushing this across the system as opposed to individual branches really helps with the marketing and promotion of our programming.
Yeah, and I'll add that, because of the lack of materials that felt accurate, authentic, and told through a Lenape lens, we've become content creators. So for us, getting the word out to New Yorkers who've had this history way too long erased, in a perverse way, it's become an opportunity because almost everything you can do to tell the authentic story of Lenape people in New York City feels like a first. So we've become content creators with the anthology, obviously with the partnership with the Lenape Center at the center of that, but also partnerships with other organizations around New York to get the word out, including a professor at Teachers College, Rachel Talbert, who's developing this as a test curriculum for K through 12th grade New York City public schools, developing this anthology into a curriculum that's being tested now as we speak. So getting the word out is always a struggle in New York City. There's a lot going on, and our marketing team does an incredible job. We've got one newsletter that goes to, I think, 500,000 or so subscribers, but it's a fight to get this long array story told, and so we do look to partnerships, and we appreciate the hearing that we're getting today.
Thank you.
And I just add, for the America's 250th exhibition we're planning on, I think the curatorial team, if they haven't reached out to you already, I think they're planning on it, and also they're planning on commissioning some Lenape artists to create works for the exhibition as well.
Well, I know you certainly have people here that are ready, willing, and able to help, and I appreciate that you're recognizing that a lot of the quote-unquote resources available are not credible, and so we have to create our own content, and that partnership with the cultural institutions and groups is going to be, I think, very meaningful, and I think clearly like a great idea and something that can expand capacity as soon as possible. I just, measuring the success of your programming, like you said, is trying to get through, I guess, all the noise of everything that is going on. But I think when it comes to arts and culture, specifically in this city, we have to do better, and we certainly should. Arts and culture, I think, is a foundational pillar to our well-being. It's a part of our identity. It's who we are. And so I'm very pleased to hear what you all are doing and what you're working on. And I'm not sure if there's anything else you'd like to add before I bring on some of your other colleagues. All right, well, I just want to thank you again for your testimony. And I just want to say, in respecting your sovereignty, your arts and culture, and I think also celebrating together, that's something that we will certainly be more intentional about, and I thank you all. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now open the hearing for public testimony, and I remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify, and no video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. In fact, we are recording the hearing that you can review at a later date. And further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such meetings to the Sergeant at Arms for inclusion in the hearing's permanent record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, again, please fill out an appearance card with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. And when recognized, you will have 2 minutes to speak on today's hearing topic. When you hear the bell go off, that means the 2 minutes is up for your testimony. You don't have to stop in the middle of your sentence. Please finish your last thought, and of course, your testimony will be included in the permanent record. Again, 2 minutes on today's hearing topic, supporting the arts, culture, and history of Indigenous peoples in New York City. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, you could always provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms, and I will now call the first panel. Maeve Montalvo, and please let me know if I've mispronounced your name, because it does happen to me as well, so I totally understand. Ty Defoe, Ika Santa Maria, and Brent Stonefish.
Honorable members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Maeve Montalvo, and I'm the Director of Education at the Museum of the City of New York. It's good to see you again, Mr. Vera. And I'm here to emphasize the importance of supporting the Indigenous arts, culture, and history, particularly that of the Lenape people, about whom we've been speaking, who are the original inhabitants of this land. For the past 2 years, the museum, myself and my colleagues, have worked in close partnership with the Endo Lenape Akin Collective, which is a coalition of Lenape leaders, elders, and artists from across Turtle Nation. Together, we are creating a multi-year project, including an exhibition called Unseated, that will reframe New York City's history through the lens of its original inhabitants. This project reflects the diversity and complexity of Lenape voices, including those from diasporic communities, as well as those who remain connected to their ancestral homelands and live within the region. Importantly, the museum and the collective continue to welcome additional Lenape voices to ensure this work reflects the breadth of these experiences. New York City is a complex place, as we all know, and the stories of the Lenape people and who tells them are equally complex. I have a deep belief in people's ability to hold and appreciate this complexity, and at the museum, we are committed to presenting it with all the nuance it deserves. The exhibition challenges dominant narratives, shedding light on Lenape's historical relationships with colonial forces, dispelling myths like the $24 sale of Manhattan, about which we've already heard, as well as exploring, importantly, the continued impact of Lenape land stewardship and cultural practices, and a worldview that can help us as we look to the sustainability and future of New York City. Our work at the museum builds on long-standing collaborations over many years, including with the American Indian Community House. But it is the work with the Endo Lenape Akin Collective that I want to testify on today. It has been my absolute pleasure and honor to work closely with the collective and the members who are representatives from 4 different Lenape nations in a growing coalition, working collectively with them to decide the art, the programming, everything that is going into this exhibition and the related programming. One thing that is unique about this is that we have an opportunity as the Museum of the City of New York to bring these stories to many more individuals that would not necessarily come to or think of coming to a program specifically about the Lenape. As a part of these efforts, we are reworking our programming and integrating, for example, Lenape stories, culture, history, as well as present-day experiences into all of our family programming so that Lenape stories become a part of the accepted, known, and really just everyday history of New York City. I know from years of working with New York City teachers and students, as well as many thousands of people, New Yorkers visiting the museum, that the very fact that Lenape people continue to live and exist today is a surprise to many. Many students are shocked. And when our partner, Brent Stonefish, who will speak as well, joined me this summer in working with and teaching 25 teachers in a program, they were humbled to be able to hear from him about these experiences. And those 25 teachers collectively this year teach over 3,000 students. We multiply this by the number of educators, over 900 each year, that we can work with at the museum. The exhibition that we are planning, we anticipate 150,000 visitors coming through. The last thing I'd like to share, and thank you for the time, the last thing I'd like to share is we are doing this work with the Endo Lenape Akin Collective, which is this, again, coalition of multiple nations of Lenape people. As the Museum of the City of New York, we have the opportunity to put our time, our resources, and the very physical plant of our building to work for the collective and for the Lenape people. My friends now in the collective, they have full-time jobs. They do not do this work as their job. They are teachers and engineers and civil servants. And so those of us who do work in the cultural sector, we can use our time, resources, and energy to be able to help them create and amplify the stories that they want to put forward. And I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this, and thank you for hearing this work.
Hello. Bonjour, Anin, everyone. Greetings to the council here, as well as relatives and colleagues who are streaming online. My government name is Ty Defoe, and I'm a citizen of the Oneida Nation and Anishinaabe tribe of Wisconsin. I'm a transgender, indigiqueer, two-spirit writer and artist living on the unsurrendered homelands of Lenape-Hoking, so not unceded but unsurrendered, in New York City. I currently reside off the NQR train in hipster Brooklyn, where you can find a plethora of vegan pizza, and I'm honored to have been recognized this year as a trans futurist working to create a just and pluralist society by reimagining systems and transforming culture as an individual artist. You know, I grew up with many different Indigenous values, including being a language speaker, which is a sister language to the Lenape. And one of our values that we hold is, if you are not dreaming 7 generations ahead, you are not dreaming big enough. So if you are not dreaming 7 generations ahead, you are not dreaming big enough. Which means I hold titles with many Native communities nationally on Turtle Island, as well as being an individual artist here in New York City. I'm known as a storyteller, a hoop dancer, a songkeeper, a language student, and a mentor. I'm a professor of practice at ASU. I'm a current writer in residence at Pace University right across the street, and I'm working on an initiative called The Ground Beneath Our Feet, which is a place-based experimental humanities research initiative. It empowers young people, scholars, to learn about the African American burial ground, as well as Chinatown here in New York City and Lenape-Hoking, and empowers people to also have their own lived experiences. In addition to my artistic work that centers indigiqueer individuals, I co-found Indigenous Direction with Larissa Fasthorse, and I'm also an artistic advisor at PAC NYC. I'm currently part of the inaugural commission of the Democracy Cycle, which I'm collaborating on a new piece titled 6 Nations, One Fire with my fellow Haudenosaunee artists from New York State, Jeanette Harrison and Vicky Ramirez. So as a language student, there's this term that I learned growing up, and it's called Bamadazuin, which translates to living to your highest human potential. And there's a reason why I was New York City bound. So there's no other place like it here, the center of all many cultures coming together. So when I first came to New York City from my home state of Wisconsin several years ago, and now call this place home, I returned to my mother's homeland, right? The Oneida Nation, which is upstate, now only on 32 acres of land, in search of community and culture and an artistic home. And actually, I lived on West 38th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue, where Port Authority bus terminal is. And I had a package of my wooden flutes there, and I would go around a city and I would play flute music for people in parks, in subways, at different festivals throughout the city looking for community. And I played at the Bronx Heritage Festival, founded by the late Bobby Gonzalez. And also I would pass people and I would just play songs for them. And I said, a lot of people that I met were Native people, and they asked me, where are the Native people in New York City, different Indigenous people? And so I said, well, you just have to look around because we're here. In the earrings that we wear, the t-shirts, places we just sort of pop up. And I said, you know, one day, this one evening, I was invited to a dance class from a friend of mine, and it was one of those long New York City hustle days, and I got this invitation to come to this class, and it was this dingy dance art studio in Midtown, and I went, and they said, okay, by the way, you have to pay $10 cash to come here. So as you do in New York City, you follow your intuition. I went, I paid my $10 cash, and what I was realizing, there was a group of individual Indigenous people gathered to have a dance class with each other. We plugged in our iPhones and we danced, we sweated, we laughed, we cried together. It was ceremony based on our own self-determining ways where we needed space. Sometimes some people would bring snacks and we would just enjoy being together. And I met Native artists of all ages, both young, middle-aged, and old. In the heart of New York City, we were protected by the simple act of paying $10, creating this self-determined space within our own community so we can talk to each other, because we are all from different tribal nations and communities, and for a few hours we can breathe and connect and belong. So I ask the City Council here, I come to you today and urge you that often presence is silenced by colonial erasure, which was mentioned earlier, and inequities. But what does it look like to challenge ongoing legacies of colonialism and envision a decolonial future? I'm telling you that Native community can be found in the rhythms of drums playing in the subways to simple symbolic literacy located on the flags, such as behind the council here. How can we amplify aunties secretly placing their medicine bundles in the East and Hudson River so that they could have space? And I wanted to emphasize the importance of recognizing and honoring intersectional identities of Native people, Afro-Indigenous people, trans, two-spirit individuals. How can we create access, amplify, and also heal? How can we find meaningful ways to express ourselves that's not defined by a single identity, but a multiplicity of them? So like many other individual artists, I ask, how can we fund individual artists like me who are not part of one organization, but are a part of many who are laboring with these organizations? How do they find out about these initiatives? The second thing is access. How can we host more meetings like this where we can have a room filled with people to tell their stories and also know about some of these selection processes? The third thing is amplifying the most marginalized Indigenous Native communities, trans, queer, Afro-Indigenous people through this vibrant city of New York. So Bamadazuwin is not only referring to living at your highest human potential, but Bamadazuwin is also living to the fullest. So as this individual artist practitioner, I'm asking support for access for individual artists who are making high cultural impact. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Good morning. I think still is morning. My name is Ika Santa Maria. I am with Kubdansa, and I have to say thank you for having us. And I'm here to testify for Kubdansa. Indigenous culture surviving in New York City, still here. Kubdansa Inc. USA is an interdisciplinary art, media, and educational organization that produces dance and multimedia experiences inspired by the wisdom of indigenous American cultures. We engage in local and international collaborations to create artivism, collaborative performances, community, and educational media dance programs. Since 2019, we have built and strengthened an intergenerational and intercultural indigenous North-South bridge through festivals, co-productions, and community education. We envision a resilient planet where every form of life is honored and indigenous values of harmony, balance, and justice are deeply respected and integrated into daily practices. We dream of a world where communities thrive sustainably, guided by the wisdom of native cultures through the universal language of dance, music, and poetry combined with digital media and rap storytelling. We foster a profound connection between humanity and nature, celebrating the rhythms and rituals that unite us all. Programming. Our organization connects and collaborates with indigenous and non-indigenous communities in the Americas, meaning the United States, Central America, South America, to promote the well-being of the planet and prevent further environmental ravages. Next year, in 2025, we are preparing an indigenous festival with educational program, artistic program, and is gonna have the participation of United States, New Zealand, Canada, Chile, among other countries, of course, including Colombia. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Oh,
You
there
got
we
it,
go.
yeah.
Kwinganao alomwa, ni di shinzi ach kok paposi, ndami minzi tekwach. Ni nonjai al na bawi la kawit, ni ha dil na bawi. Nishiki shalamokwang alamiliang yon kwai kishkwik, ni nonjai yon tali. And so what I said is, my name is the one who rides a snake. I am Turtle Clan. I am from Al Napawi La Kawit, which is a Lenape or Lenape community in Canada. I said I am also from here. I represent the Enda Lenape Aking collective. Enda Lenape Aking means the land of the Lenape in the Munsee dialect of the Lenape language, which was spoken in New York City at contact. Our word for ourselves is Linapao. Most people say Lenape. That's the Unami dialect of the language. The Linapao is the Munsee dialect of the language, and that's the language that was spoken here. And so when the Unami people call this Lenape Hoking, we say Lenapao Aking. I'm a language coordinator for our community, and I've been spending a lot of time with the only Lenape speaker left in the world, Diane Snake. She's 83 years old. I also represent the collective as one of the co-founders. My other co-founder is my cousin here, George Stonefish. George Stonefish has lived his entire life in the city. And his mother was actually one of the founding members of American Indian Community House. Most recently, we've entered into many partnerships in the city. And one of the partnerships is with the American Indian Community House. And I honor American Indian Community House because they were the first one, they were the ones that created space for Indigenous people in the city in 1969. And then most recently, they were able to receive the Mannahatta Fund, and they recognized that they needed to give that money to a Lenape collective, a Lenape group, to utilize that to create events and create educational opportunities in the city. And George, being a former member of their board, was the one they approached, who approached me, and we created the Enda Lenape Aking Collective, or for short, we say EL Collective. So if that's a tongue twister for you, just say EL Collective. You'll be fine. Anyways, the reason I'm here is that the Enda Lenape Aking Collective represents two state-recognized Lenape groups, two federally recognized groups in Ontario, Canada, and then another non-recognized Lenape group. We also have many different private citizens from different Lenape communities across Turtle Island. Because our vision is to unite and hear the voices of Lenape across Turtle Island. Our whole idea is to allow us to create space for many different stories from many different Lenape people. I respect and honor the testimony that was given by the Lenape Center, and I appreciate all of the work they've done in this community. But at the same time, there's a lot of work to be done, and we're hoping that we'll be able to share that responsibility going forward. One of the things that we're trying to do is have a two-day powwow in New York City, but because of stipulations of the Parks Department, you can only have a one-day event, and you would think they would make an allowance for the original people of this land, right? Because this city has been built on the bones of my ancestors. So with that, we also are looking for space as well. One of the things that I find unique about the American Indian Community House is that They are strained for space as well. And, you know, if they could give us space as the EL Collective, as one of their partners, they would. But they don't have the space themselves. So we're looking for space as well. And we're looking to have that powwow, 2-day powwow, which goes against policy of the Parks Department.
We'll see about that.
But we also have many partnerships, one being MCNY, one being Lefferts House and the Prospect Park Alliance. We've been talking with Inwood Park. What house is that? The Inwood House up there? And the Stone House in New Jersey as well. So we wanted to do this testimony to introduce ourselves to you, and that we are present in the city as well. And it's very expensive for me to travel from Canada to do this testimony. But I thought it was important to do that. With the help, a little bit of a help of our partners, we were able to do that, and I appreciate the time and the chic.
Thank you. May I ask, where is Diane Snake, 83 years young?
She lives in our home community in Canada.
Amazing. I just thank you for sharing that. Thank you to all of you. I agree that, you know, there's a few things that we hope these hearings will do, right? In addition to bringing us all together, sharing information. I think that's incredibly important. There are groups of many, many different sizes across the 5 boroughs, and so we try to support them all equitably, but I agree that individual artists, we're working on supporting them in a more robust way. So I appreciate your comments on that, and it is meetings like this where we're hoping through this testimony, I've certainly learned a lot, and I'll continue to as we hear from the other amazing stakeholders, but really trying to uplift the most, you know, marginalized and disenfranchised communities. I feel like that's why I'm in office. That's what I'm supposed to do. Every community is different. Every elected official is different as well. But I want you to know that, well, one is, I mean, they can do like a 3-day concert in Governor's Island, but they can't give you a 2-day permit. Anyway, we're gonna work on that. But I think to your point of the shared responsibility, I appreciate that language because it is about the generations to come and about the work that you are doing to be very, very inclusive of Indigenous peoples. I'm very grateful, and of course to the museum. A very big fan. So I guess my question is on funding. You all are looking for different different funding sources. I know the city is helpful to cultural institutions and groups, but even that is limited. So I hope that, you know, through this conversation and ongoing partnership, that the city can really step up. So I want to just thank you for your testimony. I'm humbled and, of course, very, very, very grateful to you all for the work that you're doing. Thank you. Next, Laura Phipps.
What's that?
Muriel Borst-Tarrant. Natalia Mesa Higuera, Janice Monger. The last one, right? Okay. Thank you. You don't have to take your time. It's okay. Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Chair Rivera and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak about the Whitney Museum of American Art's work with Indigenous artists and community-based organizations. I'm Laura Phipps, Associate Curator and Co-Chair of the Whitney's Indigenous Artists and Audiences Working Group, IAWG. This is an internal body that was convened in 2017 with members of the museum staff across departments to think critically and collectively about the place of Indigenous art in the Whitney's collection and program. Indigenous art was a field that the museum had not historically engaged with in our program, and one aim of the group since its inception has been to focus on how the Whitney, as an institution dedicated to American art, can address this absence and articulate a way forward. Alongside our work to build the collection and organize exhibitions, the ongoing and evolving aim of this group has been to develop programming to pursue various forms of outreach to and engagement with Indigenous artists and audiences, to create resources for museum educators and appropriate terminology for interpretation. So I'd like to share just briefly some top highlights of our work together with the committee. So the group has, as I mentioned, researched work by Indigenous artists in the Whitney's collection, built relationships with artists for programming within the museum, and we are working to frame the museum's engagement with contemporary Indigenous artists and communities. Since the Whitney's moved to its new home downtown in 2015, the museum's collection of Indigenous art has grown to include over 140 works by 43 Indigenous artists representing 38 sovereign nations. It may not sound like a huge number, but it represents a more than 20% increase over the past 9 years and is an example for us of what focused attention and resources can accomplish. We cannot simply hold them in our collection. They need to be visible and available to audiences. And to that end, since 2017, the Whitney has presented 20 exhibitions that include works by Indigenous artists, including notably all 4 of the most recent Whitney biennials, the museum's signature exhibition, and has presented the first New York Museum solo shows for at least 3 Indigenous artists at different stages in their career. Further, since 2017, the Whitney has hosted 13 unique educational programs and special events focused on Indigenous artists and culture to share this work with all aspects of our public. And one special partnership has been with, as we've all heard, the American Indian Community House, which has been a community partner through the museum's Whitney Education Community Advisory Network, WECAN, since 2018. And these are partnerships that are sustained and extended. And as a part of that partnership, the Whitney has hosted H's community gathering since 2018, reflecting this need for space. And in March 2025, everyone's invited. The Whitney will host their Spring Social, which invites the public to engage with the work of this important organization. The Indigenous Artists and Audiences Working Group at the museum also presents its work regularly to the internal Whitney community through presentations and workshops, and has advised Whitney leadership on policy development, including the adoption of the museum's first land acknowledgement in 2022, which was the culmination of a multi-year process of conversation, research, and relationship building. I will end there and thank the members of the committee for holding this hearing on this topic, for exploring and helping us explore more ways to support the arts and culture of Indigenous people in New York.
Good morning, Council. Thank you very much for having us here for this opportunity to speak on behalf of our organizations and our communities. My name is Muriel Borst-Tarrant. I'm from the Kuna and Rappahannock Nations. I am the Artistic Director of Safe Harbors, New York City. I am the former chairwoman of North America for the Indigenous Caucus for Women's Issues. I'm also the former representative to North America, special assistant to for the Indigenous Council, and I work directly with the Council of Chiefs of the Haudenosaunee Nation. I am also the daughter of Muriel Miguel of Spider-Woman Theater, and I am the former associate director of that organization. I advise on many different theaters, and I also advise with the Perlman, who we've just discussed earlier. Before I go any further, I would just like to acknowledge a little bit about what this community is here in New York City. I, and like many of my colleagues here, 2 of us, we are lifelong members of the New York City community. Some of our tribes do not come from this area, but my family has been here since 1800. And not only that, my husband was the former executive director of the American Indian Community House, who is now deceased, who died of COVID 4 years ago. What I would like to say with that is that there's many community leaders who are here who do not come from tribes from this area, who've given their life flow and their blood for this community. I would also like to acknowledge that in the surrounding areas of Manhattan particularly, there are different tribes who are in those surrounding areas that we need to acknowledge. We need to acknowledge the Shinnecock Nation, the Matinecock Nation, the Unka-Chunk Nation, and we should also acknowledge the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. These are all surrounding nations around the island of Manhattan. And I think it's also, we have to remember here that there is a lot of work to be done when it comes to the form of theater. I'm a theater maker, and I work I work in theater, and that's what I do. I would just also like to say that that Safe Harbors New York City is an arts initiative that focuses on the development and production of indigenous performing arts in New York City. We seek to build an understanding of Native American mythologies and performance that in turn will function as cultural liaison to non-Native theater artists in the city. The more successful we are in engaging these populations, the closer we hope to be to creating truly cross-cultural lines of communication. Our mission, Safe Harbor, focuses on the development and production of Native theater and performing arts in New York City within the broader American theater. We combat stereotypes and support vibrant Native communities. We develop ongoing dialogue with policymakers about the approach to cultural and socio-economic issues using theatrical performances, performing arts, Native cultural consultancy, panel discussions, and cultural events. I would just like to say that we just came back from a conference that we just hosted at Brown University, and we want to talk about the ecosystem of Native theater in New York. What we found is we gathered over 20 theaters, and one of those discussions is, other than land acknowledgement, which we are very appreciative of, but other than land acknowledgement, we need to look at programming for Native theater, for theaters. And so we are not, for lack of a better word, ghetto-sizing where we're at. So we have, we have Latino Commons, we have the Black American Theater, and what we really need in New York City is a regional theater to represent our work. We are hoping, and I urge this council, and I urge the city of New York, especially during this next economic crisis that will be coming up in the further years, that we're hoping that we can get funds for Safe Harbors New York City. So we're able to have a theater and figure out how a Native theater can happen so we can have programmings, so we can have other tribes that are coming in, that we can have the Lenni Lenape Munsee come in and they can have discussions and panel discussions. So there's a place that we can do theater. If you look at the Dramatists Guild, we see when there was a report that came out, our percentage of what is being produced, not only in New York City, but across the United States, we don't even hit the mark of the percentages. And that is because we need to start to have programming on how Native theater is being looked at. If you look at Broadway right now, we had one Native show that was on Broadway, which was Larissa Fast Horse, and was a Thanksgiving play. We need to look at how do we change that? We understand that there is a great apology that needs to be made to Native people in a whole in the United States. But I'm talking about storytelling that comes from our traditional ways of thinking, and how do we go further with that? I urge this council to think about that, and I thank you for your time.
Good morning, Councilmember Rivera. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Natalia Mesa, Community Engagement Director at Ballet Hispanico. As the city considers funding for the arts and culture, I am here to advocate for the continuation of vital support for cultural organizations, particularly Indigenous, Black, and people of color-led organizations like Ballet Hispanico. Our educational philosophy incorporates culturally relevant and sustaining approach that addresses the intersectionality of Latina identities embedded in cultural themes, histories, and legacies through traditional and current Latinx dance training. Indigenous dance contributions from the Americas and its cultural narratives are explored through our curricula. Students could be exposed to a Bolivian guanllano or a Mexican jarocho with teaching artists that are cultural bearers of the dance forms. During an assembly, students can see excerpts from Con Brazos Abiertos by Mexican-American choreographer Michelle Manzanales. The piece deals with identity questions. Am I American enough? Am I Mexican enough? Students observe the excerpt while costumes inspired by traditional dances from Veracruz flow on stage and create an ode to express and embrace all aspects of each person's identity with open arms, or con brazos abiertos. Latinos are not a monolith. We are a combination of many ethnic groups. Indigenous roots are vibrant and present in Latinx population, and Val Hispanico programs seek to give prominence to these traditions that are so often overlooked. We thank the City of New York and you for this opportunity to advocate for expand support for organizations and cultural institutions like ours, uniquely positioned to provide critical resources that support arts, culture, and history of Indigenous peoples in New York City. Thank you.
Greetings, Chair Rivera and Committee. I'm Janice Monger. I'm President and CEO of the Staten Island Museum, founded in 1881 and a New York City Cultural Institutions Group member. Staten Island Museum maintains collections in natural science, history, and art, and all three of these disciplines have materials in the collection that are Native American, Indigenous in origin. The archaeology collection has approximately 3,500 items collected on Staten Island and in the surrounding region that can be attributed to the Lenape people and their ancestors. The Staten Island Museum updated a permanent display of Lenape archaeological items along with the land acknowledgement in a central location to maximize visibility and forefront the Lenape collection for museum visitors as they enter. For decades, the Staten Island Museum's Education Department has offered the Land of the Lenape lesson for elementary and middle school classes to introduce Lenape culture to New York City students. During this lesson, students learn about the history of the Lenape and New York City region and see a demonstration of traditional tools. In FY24, the museum served 3,500 students from 155 classes for this lesson. Over the last several years, the Staten Island Museum has made concerted efforts to develop relationships and build trust with Lenape representatives, especially the federally recognized Lenape descendant nations, the Stockbridge-Munsee community, the Delaware Nation, and the Delaware Tribe of Indians. And that's because we have collections that we're responsible for at the federal level and federal regulations. We have open lines of communication with their respective tribal historic preservation officers and endeavor to always involve the communities in projects related to their cultural heritage. This year, Staten Island Museum was awarded a Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services grant to update inventory documentation and reanalyze the archaeology collection with the support of the three nations, and they have all agreed to consult on the project. The museum has also been working on our NAGPRA compliance, and we've repatriated 4 ancestors in our collection and have a stewardship agreement for their care. The Staten Island Museum staff and board are committed to continuing this important work of stewarding Native American collections in consultation with tribal representatives. We look forward to continuing to deepen these relationships and work in partnership to expand interpretation of Lenape cultural heritage in their ancestral homeland of New York City. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate, in terms of recognizing expanding interpretation and what that means, is including, as we mentioned, credible resources, and sometimes that involves creating our own content. And would you say some of the biggest challenges that you're facing is that there isn't enough intentional support for arts and culture? I know you mentioned having like a theater and having space and telling these stories. Is it that it just hasn't been available?
I think what's important to understand is culturally, in Native culture, it's not one way. It's not this compartmentalized way of thinking. That's the colonization way of thinking. When traditionally, all of these things are all encircling related into one another. Health is related into mental health. mental health is related into youth. You know, youth is interrelated into, and all of that it all compensates into storytelling. Theater in our societies is storytelling on an epic scale. So how do we do that nourishment? How do we make that cultural nourishment? We don't see us on the Tonys. We don't see us on these things. And, you know, so for a little example of that is they do a thing, there's a play called The Suffragettes, right? And it's about the feminist movement. What they show every spectrum of everybody on that stage except Native women. Native women who these women studied for the feminist movement to go further. They studied the women of the Haudenosaunee Nation because we come from matriarchal societies. Not all of us. I particularly come from it. So that's just one example how we're not in the dialogue. We're not at the table. And if someone said to me one time, if you're not at the table, then know that you're the dinner.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's something to think about that. How do we get into these consultancies? I think it's really important, and I have to agree that consultancy is one of the most important things that we can do as Native people. I also believe that we are not one way. We had an earlier speaker, I forget his name, he said we are not one way, and that is very, very true. But how do we go on to these consultancies if we say there's only one tribe here? We have to talk about the community in the whole, and what does that mean, where everybody has a seat at this table. Because inclusion isn't just for some people, it's for all of us.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I do want to see storytelling at an epic level, and the cultural nourishment is critical. So I want to thank this panel. I want to thank you for your work and for your advocacy, and I very much appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the last in-person panel: Katie Hill, Dylan Yeats, and Luke Boyd. If there is anyone else present in the chambers who would like to testify, please fill out an appearance card and join us at the dais.
Good morning, Chair Rivera and members of the Committee on Cultural Affairs. My name is Katie Hill. I am the Assistant to the Executive Director of the Perlman Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center, also known as PAC NYC. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few details related to PAC NYC's commitment to working with Indigenous artists and communities. Serving and representing all people who call New York City home is one of the key values of PAC NYC. To help us reach this goal, we created a Department of Civic Alliances to develop partnerships with key organizations who serve different constituencies. One of these partnerships is a foundational alliance with Lenape Center. We work closely with alliance partners throughout the year, providing free tickets and access to our programming, a stage to engage in dialogue with our artists and audiences, and the opportunity to curate performances on our lobby stage. Celebrated Indigenous playwright and activist Mary Catherine Nagel sits on our board, while Native American artists Ty Defoe and Muriel Borst-Tarrant are two of our artistic advisors, who you met earlier today. Our inaugural season included a 3-week run in our large theater of Between Two Knees by the intertribal sketch comedy troupe The 1941s, the creators of the hit television show Reservation Dogs. The show is an irreverent satire spanning 90 years in the life of a fictional Native American family. We intentionally programmed the show for our first season to honor the Lenape land upon which PAC NY sits and demonstrate our commitment to presenting work by living Native artists. The audience was 30% Indigenous, with many attending for free through our Access Ticket initiatives. We held special events to uplift Native and Indigenous voices throughout this first season, this 1 year. Kishiks, a photographic installation conceived by Joe Baker from the Lenape Center, a pre-show opening night performance by the band Yellow Trees, 2 performances of Good Medicine, an all-Native stand-up comedy show, 2 post-show conversations on Native representation in contemporary media with Native artists and changemakers, a community-curated post-performance panel featuring speakers from multiple Indigenous organizations, 2 pop-up marketplaces in partnership with Relative Arts to showcase Indigenous-owned fashion and design. On January 8th through 11th, we will run Teepee Tales from the Stoop, a solo show by Indigenous artist and performer Muriel Borst-Tarrant. The show is about growing up in Brooklyn, where her family were the only Indigenous residents on a mafia-run block. We plan to work with Native communities once again to bring Indigenous audiences to the show and plan associated programming. As we move beyond our inaugural year, we look forward to continuing key partnerships and uplifting Native voices. However few, dedicated funding sources exist to support programming and partnerships of this nature. If DCLA were to initiate funding opportunities specifically for Indigenous programming and civic partnership, then we would be supportive of such an initiative. Cultural organizations are eager to develop work and partnership with Indigenous communities, and DCLA can make an impact. Thank you very much again for holding this important hearing, and we hope to see you at PAC NYC soon.
Thank you. I'll be there.
Hello, I'm Dylan Yates, Director of Museum Programs and Operations for the Prospect Park Alliance, the nonprofit organization that operates Prospect Park in Brooklyn in partnership with the city. In my role, I develop interpretation and programs at Lefferts Historic House Museum. With guidance from descendant community advisors and partners, the museum explores and honors the cultures of resistance and resilience of the Indigenous people whose unceded ancestral lands the house and park rests upon, and the Africans enslaved by the Lefferts family. The vision is to transform this site of brutality into an incubator for contemporary descendant community culture and art. The museum's current focus on Indigenous history and culture and the legacy of enslavement began in 2022 with Prospect Park Alliance's hiring of a part-time coordinator to conduct new research into the site alongside a much-needed structural restoration funded by the Brooklyn delegation of the City Council. In 2023, transformative support from the Mellon Foundation funded a new interpretive plan, which was created in partnership with the Enda Lenape Collective, with representatives from 4 Lenape or Lenape nations serving on our advisory committee. This new plan celebrates the Lenape or Lenape cultures and commemorates their histories through outdoor installations, as well as ongoing workshops, public programs, and exhibits, which will be implemented over the next 4 years through further funding from the Mellon Foundation, State Assembly members Robert Carroll and Brian Cunningham, and the Prospect Hill Foundation. Additionally, just this past weekend, as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs noted, with generous support from the City Council Speaker Adrienne E. Adams, the Enda Lenape Collective, and American Indian Community House, the Alliance hosted an Indigenous Culture Fair that provided thousands of visitors with free cultural performances by the Red Blanket Singers, craft workshops, and access to Indigenous artisans from across the continent, curated by George and Julianne Stonefish. Welcoming the Lenape or Lenape to share their cultures in their homelands has a profound effect on the park and our communities. It helps us better connect ourselves to the histories of this land so we can build more sustainable and equitable relationships to it, as well as to each other. However, this work is not easy. Culture bearers need support, audiences need access, and centuries of war, dispossession, and discrimination cannot be undone overnight. Many museums and other institutions in this city took active part in the desecration of the Lenape or Lenape and other Indigenous cultures. While many are now trying to do right, rebuilding trust takes time. The only way to actually do this work is to build genuine and equitable partnerships rooted in shared respect that include tough discussions that can lead to effective actions. Supporting the art, culture, and history of the original peoples of this land and their neighbors deserves and requires substantial financial support as well as flexibility. Organizations need time to develop reciprocal relationships and shared visions, and that doesn't always fit into the typical funding cycle calendar. Culture bearers are often extremely overextended and need compensation and care commensurate with their importance. Skyrocketing transportation, accommodation, and venue costs are also a factor. I'm honored and grateful to be able to address this committee on this important topic, and I urge you to commit the resources necessary to do right by the histories we have inherited and the peoples to whom we owe so much. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Rivera. On behalf of Historic Richmond Town, my name is Luke Boyd. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs at New York City's Living History Village. I'm here today to advocate for the financial support of cultural organizations and Indigenous artists, scholars, and presenters who chronicle the life of our city and its peoples. Historic Richmond Town is located in the geographical center of Staten Island within the ancestral home of Lenape people, of Lenapehoking, within the Northeast Woodlands. Guided by the City Council and the Department of Cultural Affairs, Historic Richmond Town has refined its mission to embrace the totality of human history on Staten Island. And the history of the original stewards of this land, the Lenape, is at the center of this initiative. To address this gap in the historical narratives presented, the museum has been building a native encampment, an outdoor exhibit that illustrates the lifeways of Lenape people. This installation recreates a homestead of native peoples in the 17th century that visitors can see and touch. Since 2021, the project has evolved in stages, from the construction of a wigwam, or a summer house, an oyster midden, lean-to structures, and recently completed a palisade wall evoking defense fortifications made during colonial conflict. With the support of the private sector, donations and grants, HRT has funded phases 1 and 2 of this project. We are seeking a funder to support the third phase of this installation, which would include the creation of a longhouse, a winter structure, so that visitors can encounter the native encampment with robust structures all year round. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the encampment. The site has been a fulcrum for education and engagement on Staten Island. More than 20,000 visiting students have encountered the encampment so far, with dialogue and activities facilitated by a museum educator. Hundreds of students participate in HRT's CASA programs, have also taken part in Lenape-themed activities and lessons informed by the installation. And every year, as Commissioner Cumbo indicated, we host a Hearth and Harvest Festival, 4 years running, in which we engage more than 25 artists from the pan-Indian community across the New York City area. And this includes storytellers, dancers, musicians, and singers. And the connection to our audience has been immense. This program has grown every year, and it will continue to grow as the years go on. But a deeper impact of the encampment is that within the Native community itself. The scope of the installation, set within the bucolic campus of Historic Richmond Town, is unique among the 5 boroughs of New York City. Not only is it a place for visitors to learn about Native American culture and heritage, but it is a place for the Native community to convene. The encampment will serve and has served as a catalyst for community ceremony, connection, and healing. The encampment attests not only to the challenging history of colonization and dispossession of native lands, but to the continuous presence of Native people on this continent through the present. The Council's support for this work and the Indigenous artists is critical. The commitment to understanding and preserving Native history and culture goes beyond a yearly commemorative event or milestone. It is a perpetual practice that is ongoing, and in many ways, we have just begun. Thank you for your time.
I just want to say we've also been joined by Mr. Stonefish. I want you to just state your name for the record before you begin your testimony, and thank you for being here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is George Stonefish. I am the cousin of Brent Stonefish. And I am the individual who started the Lenapehoking Circle. Basically, it was started as a consequence of one of my cohorts, Jack Chen, who was at that time with NYU and running their Asian program, but he was always sympathetic to the Lenape. And because NYU refused to create any Lenape programs or even bring in Lenape or Native students in general, he would sponsor these events for us. And through that relationship, he was called to testify at the Landmarks Commission about the Confederate flags and all that. And they were talking about what they can do for the Lenape. And he spoke up and said, well, how can you make decisions? Because they suggested giving us a statue. And that the statues of Christopher Columbus could not be removed in New York because there's too many Italians. So, I mean, during the time of this commission meeting, he spoke up and says, how can you say you're going to give him a statue? There's no Lenape here. How do you know they even want one? So he spoke up on our behalf. And to make a long story short, Darren Walker was the co-chairman of the commission. And he approached him and says, you know, you got a lot of ideas about the Lenape. He says, why don't you write me a letter and I'll give you a grant. So he calls me up after he leaves. He says, George, blah, blah, blah letter. I said, well, write the letter. So he wrote the letter. Within 2.5 months, we got a $250,000 grant from the Ford Foundation for Lenape. Then he calls me up and says, well, what am I going to do now? We got this money. What are we going to do? I says, we're going to go and call the chiefs because as a Lenape individual, my name is George Stonefish. I'm Turtle Clan member, I'm a Lenape member, and as was stated with Brent, my mother was one of the founding members of the American Indian Community Houses Board. I've been on the board of directors for a great many years. I just got off, thank God. And now I have a little bit more freedom to do things. The bottom line is, though, it's, you know, from our things, we put together this craft fair in Prospect Park this past weekend. Phenomenal turnout. The thing is, though it was a Lenape-based craft fair, we invited members of non-Lenape native groups to participate in it. Because you have to understand, when you're talking about traditional Lenape viewpoints, we always integrated and embraced our brethren, the Canarsie, the Shinnecock, the Puspatuck, the Ramapo, the up in Connecticut. They're all allies of the Lenape community. The Lenape Nation went from just below upstate New York over by our capital over there, all the way down to the state of Delaware. This was all of our territory. But we were separated by language, different languages. Up here in the New York area were Muncie speakers. When you go down south towards Jersey, towards the border with Delaware and so forth, they're Unami. They're a different branch of Lenape that aren't from this area. And although I appreciate what the Lenape Center's been doing in recent years, I take exception with the fact that they do not work with the native organizations in New York that come from all over Turtle Island. They're our brothers. We should embrace them hand in hand and not try to isolate them and separate them from performing in spaces and that type of thing here, which is unacceptable. And the thing is, what we're trying to do is, you know, they kept mentioning federally recognized tribes. I hate to say this, but the time of the great white father telling us who are Lenape and who are not are over. We have different Lenape groups all up and down the East Coast who refuse to be removed to the state of Oklahoma and stayed back, hid in the mountains, in the swamps, and remained as constructive territories. With our organization, we are embracing all of them. I mean, we have a requirement for Lenapes to be involved with us, and that is they have a tribal council, they have a chief, they have a constitution, they have a membership policy, and that they're basically functioning as a Lenape community. Now, if they have all of these things in place, we will accept them to our Lenape Hokum organization, because both me and Brent determined at the beginning, when I brought him in as a co-chair for this organization, that we did not have the wherewithal to determine who was and was not Lenape, but their history would. So when they're accepted to the organization and they make it known, and we go and make a presentation to their tribal council, to their chiefs, and to their community, and we get to an agreement where we're accepting, where they understand that no politics are allowed with this organization. Unacceptable. I will kick them out. Because we don't have time for politics. We're coming together to create a voice of the Lenape people that goes throughout Turtle Island, which is what we call the United States of America and Canada and New Mexico, or Mexico. If you look at it, it's a turtle. And so we recognized that before the arrival of the Dutch. Now, a lot of things, we're looking at this as a full round thing. I mean, we're not just talking about doing craft fairs. And then I did the big powwow at the Park Avenue Armory in 2018, and I'll be doing another one this year. But the fact of the matter is, we do those things as an educational tool to let non-Indians and also our Indian communities have some place to celebrate and come together, whether they're Lenape or not. Because at the craft fair, we had people from New Mexico, from Navajos in New Mexico, from up in Canada. We had them from all over, along with the different Lenape groups, because this is the way that we do business. I'm an old-time person who's been a powwower, and when I could walk, I was a championship fancy dancer. And on the other hand, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I went to PS6. I went to Wagner Junior High School. I went to the Bronx High School of Science. And I went to Syracuse University. However, every summertime I spent up in Canada, up on Raventown and up on the other territories up there learning tradition and so forth. So, I mean, I've had that duality. And the reason why I wanted this organization in the first place, because as a New Yorker, you ask anybody, who were the Indians that met the Dutch? And they can never tell you that they were either the Delaware, which is the same thing, this is the white person way of saying Lenape. But they have no knowledge of that. And I said I wanted to bring back all of the histories of dispossession because we were all chased from this area except for those two groups that went down to Oklahoma. The rest of us were all massacred and chased all the way into Canada, chased into Wisconsin, chased into Jersey, and we still remain. But because we're not federally recognized, people have a tendency of not looking at, we are traditional people. And I'll tell you one thing, the Nanticoke in southern Jersey, they have the only big house of all the Lenape nations throughout Turtle Island. And a big house is similar to the Longhouse of the Confederacy. It's where we hold our traditions and our ceremonies. And we hold ceremonies there now. And, the Oklahomans, when they went to Oklahoma, they passed tribal resolutions that they will not embrace the Longhouse or the big house again. So they're not involved in tradition. They know nothing about tradition, let alone language. We have the only language speaker in our territory, and we're promoting that. We're going to use virtual reality to teach our young, to teach language to our other people. And with our organization, these are the types of things that we have that we're working on, where we're going to set up virtual reality studios on all of the Lenape communities to create the histories of dispossession, to do whatever the tribal councils want them to do, because we believe that we're not going to make those decisions. It's the chiefs and the clan mothers of our communities that will determine what we want to do. And when coming to New York City, this is our homeland. So I want to tell you, as your landlord, I welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, I'm basically done. I wanted to just touch on those areas so that you understand that.
Thank you.
But I want to end with one thing. Just calm down.
He's going to wrap it up right now.
I want to sing you an honor song in celebration of all that you're doing here for Indigenous communities. Alaska cheke na chikero, Alaska cheke na chikero, hagichi wodom, Alaska cheke na chikero. Halushka cheke na chikero. Halushka cheke na chikero. Thank you very much for all that you're doing for us. And hopefully you'll find us some money. I'm done.
Thank you very much.
That's why they don't let me talk too often.
Well, my heart is bursting, so I'm happy that you joined us. Yes, I think we need to pay for things, okay? We need to make sure that people have a place to live and a living wage and create art and have the space to do that. So I agree, we have to find some money for sure. I just want to thank you all. I want to thank this panel. You're doing exceptional work. And the arts and culture ecosystem that we've created here in New York and beyond is deserving of support. So thank you, and just know the commissioner is still here listening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We didn't have any questions.
I'm just stunned. I feel a bit speechless, and that's not typically my style. We do have two people on Zoom that I'd like to ask. Lucy Sexton and Potri Keanu Noor. Lucy?
Lucy, you may begin.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thanks so much. And thanks for everybody that testified today. Really, really wonderful. Thank you, Chair Rivera. Thank you, the Council's Cultural Affairs Committee, for holding this really important hearing and shining a spotlight on our city's Indigenous arts and culture workers, organizations, and communities. I also appreciate the Chair referencing housing and affordability. Indigenous New Yorkers experience poverty at twice the rate of white New Yorkers, and those working in the arts face even sharper economic challenges. If we want more Native artists in New York City, we need to make it more affordable to live here. As far as Indigenous arts groups receiving funding from DCLA and needing more engagement from Native groups in the process, we also require outreach and building networks of communication so that Indigenous artists and cultural groups are aware of the available support. And that requires more capacity for DCLA. Only an increased baseline can provide increased jobs to do the extensive work that DCLA is charged with doing and the wide-ranging cultural field it is charged with serving. As the city begins its planning for its 400th anniversary, we must insist that the people whose land was taken to found the city have a leading role in that planning and telling that history. The cultural community is ready to partner with the city in engaging cultural groups from all communities in this anniversary. I appreciate all the work that has been lifted up today. Native activists and leaders have made modest steps forwards in recent years. However, as we well know, the backlash has been growing, and I fear what the new administration in Washington will only make it worse. It will be worse also, as we know, for immigrant artists. We should note in this hearing, as Potri will tell us, there are many immigrant cultural groups that are also Indigenous people bearing with them the Indigenous culture of the countries from which they come. The Council, the administration, and our state government need to do all they can to protect immigrant and Indigenous New Yorkers. We must pass New York for all.
Your time has expired. Thank you.
We must protect cultural funding, which is already under attack by the right. We must do all we can to protect and support those most vulnerable, Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and all people of color, and lead the way in saying no to the shutdown of DEAI initiatives, and yes to our wildly diverse and vibrant city of culture and community. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let me bring on Potri Keanu Noor, and please let me know if I've correctly pronounced your name. Thank you.
You may begin.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, for Councilwoman Rivera. My name is Putri Rangkamaniski Anunor. In my passport, I am a Filipino. I was a nurse that was recruited from the Philippines in the height of HIV/AIDS during the 1990s. But I am a tradition bearer of the Maranao people, Southern Philippines. In the Philippines, there are groups of Indigenous people that is actually included or embedded in the monolithic, being a Filipino. But As a tradition bearer, I carried the tradition, legends, epics, and myths as what the previous natives who were presenting, indigenous people presenting how the language we carry and our stories and our history are carried through our dance, music, and chants. And we in the Philippines, in the Mindanao in particular, we became part of the Philippines only in 1898 when Philippines was sold to USA together Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Guam. And here in New York, don't want my children to be cut off from the tradition that I grew up with, and also to assert the presence and the visibility of who we are as indigenous people. We also honor the indigenous people whose land we are now living. And so the first thing that I created or I made was to to greet and introduce myself to the indigenous people here. And I met the Hinandashoni Tam Porter, and that's for him. He said, I told him we are the seventh nation. So every time we go there during Strawberry Harvest Festival, he said, "Oh, the seventh nation is here." Now, what I mean here is that the only way for us to be visible and
Your
to be
time has expired. Thank you.
is for the council to take care of us. And also, thank you, DCLE. Thank you so much for this session that we're being given a chance to speak. And uh, I would like to assert our presence as indigenous people here in the land of the Lenape people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If there is anyone else on Zoom who has not had the opportunity to testify but wishes to do so, please raise your hand. Seeing no one else who wishes to testify, I want to thank everyone here for their time and their very, very meaningful words, and of course, the call to action that we must all step up. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.